right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, former Vice President Joe Biden's incoming Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, made some news on Sunday shows announcing that the first cabinet picks of the incoming administration will be announced Tuesday. Given travel schedules and all that means, sadly, you won't hear our immediate reactions to that news. So I wanted to head it off by reading the tea leaves that his team has dropped across insider Washington media and why, if your worst fear was that Biden would return us to normal, then it looks like that is coming to fruition. The first and worst clue to come that came from Axios was an innocuous-sounding headline, which means a lot more when you start to think about it. Quote, Biden aims to deflect fights over the first cabinet picks. That sounds nice, right? Wrong. That is a signal that Biden will pick people who overwhelmingly hew to the bipartisan consensus here in Washington. And as I've said here for a long time, the most dangerous thing is not what they disagree on, but what Washington agrees on. And lo and behold, if you read through the strategic leaks, you can begin to see the makings of a disaster in all three of the major cabinet positions at Treasury, State, and the Department of Defense. At Treasury, the pickings are especially bleak. Biden announced Thursday he had made his pick for the next Treasury Secretary, saying ominously, quote, it's someone who will be accepted in all elements of the Democratic coalition, from the progressive to moderate coalitions. Washington censors quickly started going off because it basically described two people to a T. One of them is Lael Brainerd, who we've covered here. She literally architected NAFTA and China's entrance into the WTO under Bill Clinton's administration, and she spent the interim 20 years in globalist institutions around Washington and now at the Federal Reserve with little evidence that she's changed her mind. The other person, though, that seems the most likely contender to me is Janet Yellen. Yellen is a nondescript former chairwoman of the Federal Reserve with a complicated legacy. But it's clear in retrospect she is at heart deeply conventional. She raised interest rates in 2016 by trying to slow the economy, and she put downward pressure on American workers' wages in service to conventional Federal Reserve policy. And on fiscal issues, it's especially bleak. Yellen is literally the director for the, quote, Committee for a Responsible Budget, which argues for deficit reduction. And when speaking recently about federal stimulus, said, quote, the fundamental problem of the U.S. debt path is not sustainable. In other words, Yellen would be, as Treasury Secretary, what she was at the Fed, which is a highly conventional neoliberal economist at a time when we literally need the opposite to get us out of the black hole that we find ourselves in today. Over at the State Department, things are not much better. Tony Blinken is reportedly going to be the next Secretary of State, and we've covered here extensively how Blinken is at the center of a sophisticated Washington influence firm called WestX Advisors, which literally advertises on its website how it will help, quote, develop a strategy for expanding market access in China to Fortune 500 companies. But that's worse is what he did in the Obama administration. Blinken was a key voice alongside Obama advisor Ben Rhodes in bombing Libya, which got us into one of the worst quagmires of the presidency. And a 2013 profile of him in Politico describes him as having a, quote, liberal interventionist streak, which pairs nicely with Biden advisor Samantha Power's new essay in Foreign Affairs, which she describes how America is back under Joe Biden. Power, of course, is one of the leading voices for U.S. military intervention for quote-unquote moral reasons around the globe. And look, maybe he's changed. His public statements in the 2020 campaign have said we can't just return to the old ways of doing business. But do you really trust someone who's spent 30 years in Washington pushing the same line to just start doing new tricks suddenly? I'm skeptical. And finally, there is Michelle Flournoy, who is considered a lock for Defense Secretary, and it's almost comical that she is the founding partner of a business that I just mentioned with Blinken. Both of them refugees from a Hillary administration, setting up an influence-peddling firm while out of power, and then possibly ascending to run the two most powerful government agencies in all of Washington. It's a great grift if you can get it. Flournoy is considered the god queen of conventional wisdom in Washington. She ran a think tank called the Center for New American Security, which fetishized bipartisan consensus on national security in D.C., and then left that think tank to monetize it with Tony Blinken. She's represented defense contractors, Google, pretty much every other part of the defense swamp that you can think of, who largely benefit from policies that she spent a career making quote-unquote mainstream in D.C. The common theme in her views is that she's hawkish. And to the extent that she's disagreed with Biden in the past, it was because she wanted more troops in Afghanistan, not less. On Iraq, she's quoted as having a more interested in maintaining the presence that we have there. Are you beginning to sense a theme here? On the two most important foreign policy litmus tests of our time, she has been on the wrong side. The astonishing and depressing part here is that there is little evidence that she will depart at all from the course that she would have likely taken as Hillary Clinton's Pentagon chief 4 years ago. In many ways, Joe Biden is assembling the most Washington team of all time. Obama, at least, was kind of an outsider. Trump was too, as was Bush and even Clinton before him. They ended up becoming the swamp, but they didn't start out that way. Biden is just starting out the gate by putting them right back in power. He's revving up the old machinery at a pace that we have not seen here since the days of Truman and Eisenhower. And I think that we are going to pay a major price for it in the years to come. And that's the part I really can't get over, which is just how utterly conventional all of this stuff is. I mean, Jake Sullivan, right? He was going to be Hillary's national security advisor. Now he's about to be Biden's national security advisor. Tony Blinken was on the Hillary transition team. Now he's about to be Secretary of State. Michelle Flournoy. I was at a conference with Biden and Flournoy where he joked, Madam Secretary, right? And he was like, oh, you're going to be defense secretary. And now she's about to be the next SecDef under him. It's like the entire machinery. And again, to the extent where they differ from Biden, it's that they're worse. It's that they've actually pushed bad things. Blinken and Flournoy running a Washington influence peddling team. Lael Brainerd working with like Goldman Sachs in order to enter Chinese markets in the 1990s. And Janet Yellen, who is likely responsible for the wage slowdown and crushing, or at least crushing some wages in 2015 and 2016 as Fed. There's not an iota of original thinking that is in this list here.
Yeah, that's the thing. You went through the list of the different administrations and how, look, some of them sort of ran as outsiders or didn't run as outsiders. But all of them, when they come into Washington, they basically like staff up with the same people. And that's why you end up getting very similar policy results no matter who the American people ultimately vote for. And these cabinet picks are very much in line with that. They could have been in a Clinton 1 administration. They could have been in a Hillary Clinton administration, could have been an Obama administration. A couple things, Tony Blinken, and this has been, confirmed now that he'll get picked this week. One thing that's interesting to me about this pick and is consistent with the way that I've seen Biden operate is he really leans on people who have been with him for a long time.
That's right.
And that has major implications because these are people who are there, Tony Blinken was his advisor when he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and platforming all of Bush's arguments to go to war in Iraq.
Say, what happened during that? Oh, right.
The Iraq War. So so Tony Blinken was there by his side during that critical period, right? He's been with him for a long time, so there's a comfort level, so you get all of this old legacy thinking from the past 40 years in Washington that he brings into government. On the Treasury pick, either Lael Brainerd or Janet Yellen, and also when he's made comments before about wanting to appease the progressive wing of the party and make everybody happy all together. David Sarda made a great point on Friday. He's like, it doesn't work that way. The progressive wing, on economics in particular, progressive wing and the corporate wing are diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
It is a zero-sum game.
Right.
If you are actually trying to appease both groups, that is a literal impossibility. But what I usually read in those comments is more like, oh, we're going to make some diversity pick.
Yeah, which is
and
exactly
that's what we're going to do. That's
right.
The most that they'll do to appease progressives is make some diversity pick. I will say there's a leak out about who the UN secretary will be.
Yes.
Not Pete.
Yeah.
That does make me kind of happy because we were talking about how he wanted to be the ambassador to the UN because it's, fancy job. You don't have to, it's very prestigious.
You live in this very penthouse apartment in Manhattan.
Yeah, you live in Manhattan.
It's a good gig.
You get to, you get to hang out with all of the U.S. and global elites and don't have to do all that much work.
You don't have to do any work.
Right.
It's perfect for him.
He was not looking forward to, he may end up with VA secretary, but that's actually a real job and you actually have to work for it and there's some level of accountability and you have to be here in D.C., so I guess he's still up for that one, so sad for him.
Don't worry. He could, things could get way worse. He could be the U.S. trade representative, which would be, I'd put a bullet in my head. Something like that. That's probably that is the most underrated position, which has the most importance whenever it comes to renegotiating these trade deals. Really what it is when you're looking at all of this is just the perfect, it's like a puzzle where they're just putting in just Washington after it's like everybody who, if you have come up here over the last decade, you know these people, you've brushed shoulders with them, you've been in conferences with them, and not one of them has updated their thinking to what happened after Trump. Maybe Jake Sullivan. I want to give some credit. He's the only one who's even thought about it a little bit. I've read and looked at some of the stuff he said about neoliberalism and China, but I mean, one guy up against this entire establishment, the machinery, all of the people that are going to come in and work for them. Like you said, to the extent that any of them are more progressive, it's on race justice issues and woke politics, which does not portend well for that administration. And I can just see very clearly the blueprint which is being laid out over the next 4 years.
There's this so telling anecdote in the long piece in the American Prospect that we've referenced here a million times that predicted that Flournoy and Blinken would both be at the center and the heart of the Biden administration. This was months ago that they wrote this.
And nobody paid attention except for us.
Yeah, and I mean, that one piece really gave us so many insights into who the likely insiders would be. And there's this incredible anecdote there with Michelle Flournoy, where she's at this conference where they're talking about what to do with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and whether the U.S. should stop providing arms to Saudis that they could use in this horrible campaign in Yemen, something that's been obviously a major progressive priority, but also priority of some of the anti-interventionists on the right as well. And she seemed like, she was like, well, let's make a distinction between offensive capabilities and defensive capabilities. Saudis still need Patriot missiles to be able to defend themselves. And one of the people in the room said, it sounded right there like she was representing Raytheon because they're the ones who make Patriot missiles. And in fact, they wouldn't, Flournoy and Blinken won't disclose which defense contractors they've actually been working for. And this is, look, let's be clear, this is business as usual.
Oh, this is totally legal.
Doesn't make it okay, and doesn't mean that these people are going to operate in the American public's interest when they financially benefited from the people who make the weapons of war and profit off of war every single time.
Can you think of a better gig if your former, if you hire somebody and then they become the Pentagon chief who is in charge of doling out hundreds of billions of dollars in funds? Can you think of a better gig? It's amazing. And this is all, again, 100% legal. We will never know. She doesn't have to disclose any of that work under current legal guidelines and can ascend to the top of the Department of Defense, presiding over $780 billion with zero oversight. It's just amazing.
Indeed.
All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.